Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, I'm breaking down not one, but two UFC events, which will be taking place on May the 31st. The first one taking place from Berlin, Germany. It'll air early in the morning, at least where I'm living. I'll be giving you my main card predictions for the four fights. The second event, the TUF Brazil, I believe it's the third edition of the season finale, which will be taking place later in the night. I'll be breaking down three main card fights for that. I will not be breaking down the two Ultimate Fighter fights, because with this many fights happening in one day, I'm going to pick and choose what fights I'm going to break down. I'm going to give you as many preliminary picks as I possibly can on my website. Before we get into everything else, I'm coming off a very poor showing, UFC 173. I've had back-to-back poor showings. But overall, there have been, 13 upsets over the last two cards, which is pretty difficult to call, including TJ Dillashaw putting together a masterful performance and taking the bantamweight title from Renan Barão. And I'd like to point out that I had an idiot poster I've since banned from posting on my YouTube videos, was constantly on me for taking some of the upsets I took in the main events, because I did see things that I thought could lead to an upset. And I remember one of his quotes said, "Oh, what are you going to do next? Take TJ Dillashaw to upset Renan Barão?" Of course, I didn't take that. I felt Barão was the better fighter. Clearly, TJ Dillashaw had a much better night and proved to be much, more in a different point than most of us expected him to be. But nonetheless, that shows that fool and many other people who like to second guess people when they pick upsets that don't pan out. This is MMA, and anything can happen. And preconceived notions regarding fighters' capabilities are wrong, proven wrong all the time, and that's why it's not easy betting on these shows and making money. Now, as far as my bet packs are concerned, I certainly have struggled over the last two shows. I had some fights where I told you not to bet on them. For example, Ally Quinta, who was upset in a surprising fashion by Canadian Mitch Clark. Nonetheless, I'm going to try and make it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do basically one bet pack for two events and try and find the best odds and best betting options for the two fights, two shows, and combine them together to make the most money. We have 7 fights I'm going to break down in this episode of the show, so that's enough talking for me. Let's get to my first prediction. The first of 4 main card fights taking place in the UFC Fight Night 41 event from Berlin, Germany will feature featherweights as Tom Stoneface Niinimäki takes on Swedish opponent and debuting Nicholas Backstrom. Niinimäki carries a 21-5-1 record into this fight. Backstrom comes 7-0. Of course, this is Sweden versus Finland, which is always a great hockey rivalry. It should translate to MMA very well. Now, Backstrom's taking this fight on short notice, approximately 2 weeks. For Niinimäki, he's in the UFC for the second time, so his comfort level should be increased. He's coming off a pretty impressive win over Hani Yahya in his debut, because he beat Yahya where he thrives in fights. Niinimäki's very well rounded in his win total: 7 knockouts, 8 submissions, and 6 decisions, so he really can do it all. Recently moved to the Black Zillion camp and has showed improvement in his striking, and his grappling, as I said, looked fantastic against Yahya, really taking it to the very dangerous Brazilian fighter where he usually thrives. Now, Backstrom comes from a grappling background as well, but just has 1 submission win overall. He prefers to strike. He's solid kickboxing arsenal. In one of his most recent fights, he caught Max Koga with a beautiful front kick right up the middle, just 15 seconds into the fight, and put him down for good. And it was a highly anticipated fight that pretty much got him this opportunity. Overall, 4 wins by knockout, but only 7 pro fights compared to 27 from Niinimäki, which is a big experience differential. He's also a big step up for Backstrom. He really hasn't faced anybody on this level before. Niinimäki, on the other side, has faced multiple UFC vets, guys like Hatsu Aoki, who he lost to, but still, it's a big experience advantage there. Backstrom's training out of a very good Swedish camp, led by Alexander Gustafsson. A lot of guys there that are coming along as Sweden's MMA scene develops significantly. But there's a number of things with Backstrom coming into this fight. He's taking it on very short notice. He's debuting. He has limited pro experience to draw upon. And I said this is a big step up in competition for him. Niinimäki's a well-versed veteran. So my prediction here is Tom Niinimäki to defeat Nicholas Backstrom by decision. Up next, we have our first of 3 middleweight bouts taking place in the main card of this event, as the big, slow Luke Barnett of TUF Ultimate Fighter fame, undefeated with a record of 8-0, takes on a fellow undefeated opponent, Sean Tarzan Strickland, with a record of 14 wins and no losses. Now, these are 2 very good prospects. Barnett comes into this with three straight wins in the UFC, including 2 finishes. So he had a pretty short, limited record coming into this, but he's really looked good since coming into the octagon. Strickland, in his debut, dominated Bubba McDaniel, took the fight on short notice, and he came into that undefeated and did an excellent job really putting it on him. Now, Barnett, very big for the division, he'll have a 5-inch height advantage, but only 2 inches of reach. Strickland's a fairly long guy, and he'll help make up for that. Barnett showed us he's very capable on the floor, which a lot of people might have overlooked. Only 3 submission wins, but he choked at Andrew Craig after hurting him several times. But he could be very vulnerable in this fight if he gets put on his back. We'll have to see if that plays out. On the feet, the Brit has very solid striking. We saw him drop Andrew Craig on a couple of occasions. So he ghosted Mats Nielsen in his last fight with a brutal head kick and follow-up, put him away. He doubles up his jab very nicely. He has a lot of power, and he's very dangerous if he lands, and he's working on his range striking. The better he gets at that, the more effective a fighter he will be. Not a lot of foot speed, as his nickname would kind of tell you. He allows his opponent to get on the inside, which is certainly a concern. He was getting actually tagged by Mats Nielsen when Nielsen came forward and had him backing up, which is a major issue, and he struggled with the speed of Nielsen, and that's a concern here against Strickland. Now, Tarzan Strickland, he's got a Muay Thai base, very patient, doesn't rush into things. He picks his spots. He has 7 wins by knockout. It's not exactly the best telltale sign of the guy's striking capabilities. He will hold his hands a little bit low, which is a bit of a concern. But on the mat, he's a very strong grappler. Excellent top position fighter, solid ground and pound, very capable picking up submission skills. We saw what he did against a pretty good grappler in his own right in Bubba McDaniel, and took his back effortlessly and put him away very quickly in an impressive debut. I expect to see Strickland look to use his speed and movement to attack Barnett on the feet and really take Barnett's power out of it, because if you can't hit, it doesn't matter how hard you throw. If you can't make contact, it's not going to be that effective. What Strickland has to do, he has to come close, get inside, land some big shots, but he has to be patient when he's looking to get inside and pick his spots. He cannot afford to rush in and let Barnett tag him. I think he'll do a nice job. That's where his patience comes into play. Barnett being put on his back is not a good thing for a big man like him. I think Strickland will have success there, and my prediction is Sean Strickland to defeat Luke Barnett by submission. In our co-main event of the evening, we're still in the middleweight division. The number 9th ranked Francis Limitless Carmont, with a record of 22 wins and 7 losses, takes on the Doberman, unranked, well, he shouldn't be, but the Doberman CB Dalloway with a record of 15 wins and just 6 losses. Now, coming into this matchup here, Carmont's coming off his first UFC loss to Jacare Souza, which, he went down as many expected he would, even though I picked Carmont in the upset. I felt he won one of the 3 rounds, and I felt he could have done more. He just was a little bit hesitant. Dalloway's coming off a win. He should be on a 4-fight winning streak after a controversial loss to Tim Boach that many felt that Dalloway had won that fight. Nonetheless, Carmont, on the other hand, actually coming off a couple questionable wins as well earlier in his UFC run over Lorenz Larkin and Tom Lawler, so many felt he should have been on the winning streak that he was on. That's how MMA goes, and we'll roll with it. Now, both are very big middleweights. Carmont will have a 1-inch height advantage and 2 inches of reach on his side. Now, he trains out of TriStar. He's shown impressive wrestling in his win over Costa Philippou. Overall, he averages 2.04 takedowns at 42%, so he knows how to take the fight to the mat and dominate with that capability. Solid striking, averages 2 strikes landed per minute, so not a ton there against 1.26 strikes absorbed, so he does limit his opponents, but he needs to up his work rate. In his debut against Chris Camozzi, he showed very good Muay Thai, but he really hasn't showcased that much since. Really has backed off of late. He seems a little bit hesitant to engage. I don't know what the issue is there, or just more focused on setting up his ground game. He has a solid clinch game when he opts to use it, uses his knees and elbows, really turns his knees over well when he delivers them. He can work his elbow strikes as well. Now, CB is a former NCAA Division I wrestler and a BJJ blue belt. Just 3 wins by submission, but he's a very good grappler despite the fact he's just got the trio of submission wins. 3.97 takedowns per fight at a 53% completion rate, which is pretty solid number, certainly above average. He can dominate it with his wrestling, which is a big plus on his side. And when we saw Francis Carmont, he didn't offer a lot off his back against Jacare. Now, I know it's Jacare Souza and what he's capable of. When you have Jacare on top of you, you want to be very limited in what you do and focus on your defense. But nonetheless, that's something to take into account when you're looking at a big man like CB Dalloway potentially getting on top. Now, Dalloway, on the other hand, 85% takedown defense. Tough man to take down. Carmont could look to put him on his back in the matchup, and we saw him struggle when he fought Lorenz Larkin and couldn't take him down. It really took him out of his element, and he didn't really have a way to switch up that game plan. He just kept working the takedowns that really did not come, despite the fact he got the win. I felt he should have. I picked him, but I felt he had lost that fight handily. Now, Dalloway has to watch his chin when they're striking. That's a big thing. He has 2 knockout losses, and he's been hurt in a couple of fights. He's a little bit chinny, but other than that, he's looked very good on the feet of late. We saw him hurt Daniel Sarafian in that fight, and he stopped Fajeda in the last bout with a short, quick punch. Looked very good with his striking. Overall, his technical abilities are coming along quite nicely. Solid kicking arsenal, good hands, far more active than Carmont in the stretch of things when he's attacking. And the way I look at it is, unless Carmont can either out-wrestle him or is more aggressive on the feet than he usually is, he's going to struggle to mount much offense and outwork CB. Obviously, there's a chance he could land a big shot. Nonetheless, for CB, his confidence is rolling. That's a lot in MMA. That's a big deal, where Carmont has not looked that great in his last couple of fights. And I've got CB Dalloway pulling off a little bit of an upset. I'll take Dalloway over Carmont by decision. In our main event of the evening, we remain in the UFC's middleweight division as the number 7th ranked Mark, the Filipino wrecking machine Munoz, with a record of 13-4, takes on a number 11th ranked and former Strikeforce champion Gegard Mousasi, carrying a record of 34 wins, 4 losses, and 2 draws. Now, this is a big fight for both men. They're both coming off losses to Lyoto Machida, and both were decisive in different styles. Munoz was knocked out in his fight in the first round, while Mousasi was dominated for the most part for 5 rounds and lost a decision. And this is a second appearance for Mousasi since moving back to middleweight, so keep that in mind as well coming into this. Now, for the most part, we have a striker versus a grappler, at least where their fortes are, but both can hang in the other's realm. Now, Mousasi is a very good kickboxer, 18-0 in fights ended by knockout, which tells you he has brutal power and an excellent chin. Last KO, though, came against Hiroshi Izumi back in Dream, and that took place in 2011, so it's been a little while since we've seen Mousasi put the stamp on somebody. He's going to look to change that here. Now, Gegard, solid combinations, good kicks, just damage with his knees as well. 3.5 strikes landed per minute versus just 1.08 strikes absorbed, so an excellent damage to basically damage exchange quotient, we'll call it that. Limits his opponents very well. He doesn't seem like a high volume striker, but he does pile the numbers up when he attacks. I'd say he could benefit from being a little more aggressive. To me, he seems a little flat-footed when he's striking, and that can cost him. Now, Mark Munoz can strike on the feet. He's been working to improve his game there. He has power. He likes to throw those looping overhand punches, which is a major liability against a guy like Mousasi, as it was against a guy like Machida, who's a better striker, more crisp, and better technique. Munoz has been KO'd 3 times, so that's something to take into account here. He was stopped by both Chris Weidman and Lyoto Machida, and he wants to limit the striking exchange with Mousasi as well here. There's no denying that. Now, Mark is a former NCAA Division I wrestler, 2.57 takedowns at 26%, so not a great completion number, but he's still more than capable of getting the job done with his wrestling. 5 takedowns against Tim Boach, 5 against Chris Liebman, 3 against Damian Maia. He knows how to do it, and he knows how to execute. Very strong on top. He has those heavy Donkey Kong punches, he likes to refer to them as. Very active and can do a lot of damage with that top position. He doesn't just sit idle into guys' guards. He is wailing away and looking to hurt you. Most of his strikes landed per minute actually come on the mat. He averages 3.35, and he does a lot of his damage from top position, as I mentioned. Good sub defense as well. Not a lot of offense. We haven't seen him submit anybody in the UFC, at least. Nonetheless, he's very capable of defending. Mousasi, he's good on the mat. 11-2 in fights ended by submission. Most recently subbing Mike Kyle in one of his last Strikeforce appearances. He's not afraid to work off his back, almost to a fault. We saw him lose his title against King Mo because he was willingly put on his back so many times. He's just simply too willing to be taken down. But you have to watch for those up kicks. He cracked Jacare with one of those. He's very dangerous with his up kicks, and that could cost Munoz if he gets sloppy trying to work outside of the guard. 51% takedown defense for Mousasi, but again, it's a liability. Machida took him down once, but you go back to guys like Keith Jardine and put him down 6 times. Not the greatest wrestler. I know that was a light heavyweight in that matchup. Nonetheless, that's still a major concern. He has been working to improve his wrestling. Go back to Strikeforce again. He beat OSP on the mat with his takedowns, and certainly he could look to turn the tide on Mark Munoz. Munoz showed aggression on the floor in fights, and he knows he needs to score takedowns in this matchup. He knows he has to get the fight to the ground and be active and not get stood up and not lose opportunities that he's granted when he does score them. In Chris Liebman and Tim Boach fights, he did very well with that wrestling game. He never settled in the Machida fight. It ended very quickly, and I didn't expect him to put Machida on the mat with Machida's distance management. Mousasi, again, as I mentioned, he's a little bit flat-footed for my liking. He likes to plod forward. That's a perfect opportunity for a power wrestler like Mark Munoz who's going to look to time you and grab you and put you on the mat. Mark, again, has to be careful not to run into anything, which is a real possibility. But here's what this thing comes down to. Munoz has never gone 5 rounds, but he's 6-1 in decisions. He's got excellent cardio, excellent condition. He's not going to slow down. Mousasi's 5-2 in decisions, but both his losses came in 5-round fights. I think his defensive wrestling is just not there. Munoz gets on top, does enough damage, and my prediction is Mark Munoz to defeat Gegard Mousasi by decision. We now transition to the TUF Brazil Finale, which will take place later in the day, and we're kicking things off in the UFC's featherweight division. I said I'm not breaking down the Ultimate Fighter finale fights. I'm just going to the tournament final fights. I'm just going to break the focus on the fights. And I said we start in the featherweight division as Hani Jason with a record of 15-4-0 battles Robbie Problems Peralta with a record of 17 wins, 4 losses, and just 1 no contest. This fight should be very exciting. Jason's fighting at home. Honey Jason's fighting at home in Brazil, where he's fought all of his UFC fights, and he's 4-1 coming into this fighting at home with 3 stoppage victories. He's coming off a controversial win where he knocked down Steven Siler and hurt him, but certainly Siler had his wits about him when the referee stopped the fight. Now Peralta's coming off a come from behind win where he stopped Esteban Payan after losing the first 2 rounds. He got him in the 3rd round and put him down. Now Peralta, in the fight before that, he did not look good against Akira Corsani. As they said, he struggled against Esteban Payan, especially his grappling. So he's kind of had 2 very poor showings in his last 2 fights. And he's coming back from suspension, I believe, before the Corsani fight. Both guys have serious power, but the numbers certainly favor Robbie Peralta. He's 13-0 in fights ended by knockout, or Honey Jason just 5-2. Now, Peralta, what he does well, he has very solid leg kicks, and he has dynamite in his hands. For Honey Jason, he uses a number of weapons, though. He has good, solid kicks, excellent knee strikes. He'll throw that jumping knee when the opportunity shows, and he also works some elbows in as well, and he has power in his hands to boot. Now, Jason, he was stopped by Jeremy Stephens via brutal head kick, which is, Stephens knocks you. It's not a knock on your chin, I don't think, because Stephens he has some serious power. Nonetheless, Jason needs to be very careful standing with Peralta, because Peralta has equally as dangerous power. Jason has a tendency to get a little bit reckless, and that could cost him in this matchup. Now, both guys land at a high rate. Edge goes to the American there. Both guys get hit at a high rate, just over 3 strikes per minute. Slight edge to Honey Jason, taking a little bit less damage, but it's almost negligible. Now, Honey Jason on the floor is a BJJ black belt, also a judo orange belt, 8 wins by submission. Very dangerous on the ground, very aggressive on the mat, and that's something to keep in mind here, both on top and on the bottom, no matter where he goes. Now, he doesn't put up big takedown numbers, but he's been on the mat in most of his fights regardless of that. Peralta really struggled on the floor with Payan. Payan really wasn't doing a ton on top, but Robbie had a ton of problems, we'll say, on the floor. And, oh, sorry, I just lost my place there. He was making some basic mistakes that Joe Rogan kept pointing out, some things he needed to tighten up, and he just wasn't doing it. And overall, he's 2-2 in fights ended by submission, which is something to concern. Also, Payan had a lot of success sweeping him. Actually, Peralta landed more takedowns in that fight, and Payan was able to sweep him into the better position, and Jason's more than capable of doing that, as he's very active off his back. So if Peralta takes him down, look for Jason to tie up a submission pretty quick and threaten off his back, like he did against Mike Wilkinson with a quick triangle. Now, he has been taken down. Peralta has been taken down 6 times over 4 UFC fights. I'm excluding the Young fight because it was a very quick fight that ended too quickly before anything could be established. So Peralta can be taken down. And Jason needs to exploit this, take Peralta's power game out of the fight, expose what appears to be some issues on the ground. Robbie Peralta's a brawler, and it looked like Corsani figured him out. It looked like for a while Payan figured him out, at least for 2 rounds. And Jason needs to be a little bit more measured with his striking to take advantage of that. And again, he needs to exploit that ground advantage. And my prediction is Honey Jason at home to defeat Robbie Peralta by submission. In the UFC's welterweight division, number 8th ranked Damian Maia, the record of 18-6-0, battles debuting Alexander Yakovlev with a pretty impressive record of 21 wins, 4 losses, and just a single draw. Now, this is a Russia versus Brazil matchup, which always seems to translate as excellent fights for some reason. It's just a good stylistic clash. Yakovlev's making his debut, as I mentioned, 7 months on the shelf coming into this, coming in fresh off a win over Paul Daly. He also has a loss to UFC fighter and fellow Russian Rashid Magomedov, which happened back in late 2012, and Yakovlev's replacing Mike Pierce, so it's not exactly a good full camp for this matchup. Now, Maia, this is a massive fight, and he's coming off back-to-back losses, and his spot in the ranking is certainly at risk when you're taking on a debuting fighter with limited pull in the organization. Yakovlev has struggled against next-level competition overall, outside of his win over Paul Daly. As I said, he lost to Magomedov, and he also lost to Karl Amasov of Bellator by submission earlier in his career. And the big number that stands out for me for the Russian is 3 losses by submission. That's something against Damian Maia that should jump off the page at you. Multiple grappling accreditations, nonetheless, in Sambo and freestyle wrestling, so he's far from unwilling to go to the ground, or certainly not a novice on the floor. He has a good wrestling shot, also look to fight the ground with a body lock takedown, solid top position fighter, not the greatest off his back, and again, that's also a major concern. For Damian Maia, it's well understood what he wants to do. Get the fight to the mat, start looking for submission opportunities, really wear his opponent out. 4th degree BJJ black belt, 9 wins by submission overall. He has great wrestling, great grappling numbers, 3.05 takedowns at 29%, so not a good completion rate, but nonetheless, he gets the job done with a 3.05. He's landed 5 takedowns even in his last 2 losses, which shows how effective he is with his ground game. 17 takedowns overall since moving to welterweight, which has lasted 5 bouts. He will shoot or tie up and drag his opponent to the floor. Also, he'll pull guard if necessary. Might not be the best opportunity here to give Yakovlev a chance to work from the top, because, you look at his Jake Shields loss, he spent too much time in his back, allowing Shields to control top position. He also got swept a couple times in that fight, which is a concern, but I don't know how Yakovlev and Jake Shields not even in the same category as far as grappling is concerned. The big question mark for Maia, though, is can he dominate for 3 rounds in a fight? We saw him fade against Roy McDonald, but consider this is a major drop in caliber of opponent. But still, it's a big question mark, and I'd like to see Maia really be effective with his ground game and show us that he's not a gas bag and can be done after a round or a round and a half and not be able to follow through when he can't submit somebody early. Nonetheless, Yakovlev, he needs to work his striking, dictate the range, and then if it goes to the ground, be tough on top, not allow Maia to get anything going off his back or be very defensive off his back if that's where he gets put. Yakovlev, pretty solid striking, 8 wins by knockout, kickboxing based. And he can work from range pretty effectively, and that's where he likes to shoot from as well. So if he can keep the distance, that could really nullify Maia's grappling. Maia improving striking, but it's still his weak point. He doesn't want to spend a lot of fights trading with guys. But the thing is, one thing I look at, Maia is a very strong welterweight. He's a former middleweight, and Yakovlev strikes me as the type of guy who's going to struggle with the physical grappling style of Maia, especially when Maia, the way he's able to rush in, lock up his hands, and put guys on the floor. Again, those 3 losses by submission are just too much for me to overlook for a debuting fighter on short notice, going to Brazil to face Demian Maia. Certainly that also leads me to believe this fight goes to a decision. It could favor Maia as well. Nonetheless, my prediction is Demian Maia to defeat Alexander Yakovlev by submission. And as I said before, we are going to skip the 2 Ultimate Fighter fights. I have to pick and choose what fights I'm going to break down because simply I don't have enough time with 2 events in one day. And we're headed to the UFC's heavyweight division. Number 7th ranked Stipe Miocic with a record of 11 wins and 1 loss takes on light heavyweight Fabio Maldonado with a record of 21 wins, 6 losses, and no draws. And Fabio Maldonado has brass balls, and certainly, he's stepping, that's undeniable considering he's stepping up to face Junior Dos Santos and taking on a talented, massive heavyweight in Stipe Miocic. This is the second time he's actually stepped up, and the UFC certainly takes notice of that. The first time was against Glover at home. We all know how that turned out. Nonetheless, Maldonado comes in riding a 3-fight winning streak. Now, what we have here is a light heavyweight versus a heavyweight, and the numbers certainly back that up. Miocic 6'4" versus Maldonado, very generous 6'1". Miocic 240 pounds. He's very big for the division. Maldonado, on the other hand, he's not a giant, but he's certainly a big man for heavyweight. Maldonado, though, 205 pounds. I could see him getting down and tightening up and becoming a middleweight, so I think he's going to be certainly overmatched in the weight category. And we all saw how that fared for Alexander Shlemenko, and also a little bit for Dan Henderson more recently against Daniel Cormier. 5-inch reach advantage as well for Stipe, and that'll be a concern for the striking exchanges. Maldonado, he wants to keep this fight standing nonetheless and outland Miocic. Use his speed, get in there and pepper away. Use his boxing, work those body shots, and just keep landing over and over again and hope to just, pick away Miocic and hope he slows down. Maldonado, though, for my money, takes way too much damage. He lands at a rate of 6.20 strikes per minute, but he gets hit at over 4.01. For Stipe, high landing rate for a heavyweight, 5.18 versus 3.19 strikes absorbed per minute. And keep in mind, the strikes here, it's going to be a heavyweight power behind what Miocic has to offer, and that's something Maldonado really hasn't tasted in a while, at least since coming to the UFC. And Maldonado, again, doesn't have a ton of one-punch power. He needs to accumulate his strikes, and he can't exchange shots with Miocic. Even if he's landing 3 for 1, it's going to catch up with him. Stipe, he showcased some very good striking skills against Roy Nelson, really executed an excellent game plan, showed how coachable he is. He avoided the big shots, used a lot of movement, landed his big shots of his own, did some damage against a man who can take a punch, and he certainly put a beating on Roy Nelson. An upset I predicted, thank you very much. He has huge power, 8 wins by knockout, and that reach is going to allow him to touch Maldonado where he can't get it, with both kicks and punches where Maldonado is unable to get inside and land shots. It should keep him on the outside. For all the striking information I just gave you, I really think it's going to be of limited importance because Fabio Maldonado has next to no takedown defense. It's brutal. The only numbers he's able to produce as far as good defensive takedowns are after his opponents gas out or are tired. He's had a number of those guys like Cal Kingsbury and Gian Valente. Nonetheless, he really struggles on the mat. Glover wore him out and destroyed him on the floor. Valente landed 3 takedowns. Cal Kingsbury, even when exhausted, put him down several times. Roger Holette, who has a limited wrestling background, put him on his butt twice, which is a major concern. Stipe comes with very good wrestling, coming from a solid wrestling background, and he's going to take this fight to the ground. It's undeniable. Unless he knocks out Fabio Maldonado early, he's taking this fight to the ground. We saw him, rest in peace, smash Shane Del Rosario on the floor with those big elbows to the midsection and show what he's capable of there. Fabio, he's not going to be able to withstand what Miocic has on the mat for very long. He needs to be able to get up, and he's not going to be able to. He's too tough for his own good, so it's probably going to bring about a ref stoppage before it actually ends in TKO. Miocic's ground and pound and size is just going to be too much, and unless Stipe gasses beyond belief and Maldonado, is fighting a massive uphill battle in this fight, wherever it takes place, either way, my prediction is Stipe Miocic to defeat Fabio Maldonado by TKO. So those are 7 main card predictions. 4 for the UFC Fight Night 41, 3 for the TUF Brazil fights. Again, before people ask me where my finale tournament final predictions are, they're not taking place. I can't repeat that enough times. all of as many preliminary predictions that they might be shorter will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net, and the bet pack will encompass both cards. They'll try to make some money combining the best fighting options from both these, and I have taken some upsets. I'm certainly aware of that. Nonetheless, we've seen a lot of upsets recently. The UFC MMA becoming very unpredictable of late. We'll see if it regulates itself a little bit, or if we still see this fighters winning. A lot of people don't anticipate them winning. Nonetheless, I've taken some upsets. Hopefully, it falls in my hands. Thank you very much for listening. As always, we have a heck of a lot of MMA ahead of us, and I'll do my best to keep up with it, and I will keep trying. And as always, thank you very much for listening. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions.